Greetings, Earthlings! Welcome to Beyond the Tinfoil Hat, a podcast by the Experiencer Support Association. I'm your host, Jamie Delzell, and I want you to join us for a trip down another rabbit hole where we find all kinds of unusual and unexplained phenomena. Remember, the first 30 minutes of the show is absolutely free and available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and iHeartRadio. Head over to Patreon and catch 30 minutes and beyond of extra audio as we dive even further into today's topics, exclusively for our subscribed fans with top secret clearance. Now let's dive right into it. Welcome to Beyond the Tinfoil Hat. We are in the final episode of this crazy year that is 2020. As always, I will bring on our lovely co-host, Mr. Ryan Stacy.
Hello, good evening, and good night.
Heyo. Okay, and tonight we have an extraordinary guest. We are absolutely stoked for this one. This man has been in the field for nearly 30 years, worked with almost every UFO research group there is, some of the biggest names on the subject as well. He's an experiencer himself. He's going to have all kinds of amazing info for us. I can't give enough praise to this guy. An avid poster on Tessa, Dr. Joseph Burkes. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me on your show tonight. Right now, I'm in the western part of the United States, Humboldt County, sheltering in place with my wife, our 4 small dogs, and a 110-year-old desert tortoise named Moisha.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being with us. We're so happy to have you here. And let's just jump right into it. You got all kinds of really, really interesting stuff to talk about. So we don't have a ton of time. So let's just jump right in.
Okay, well, it's a little bit about myself. Born and raised in New York City, and during the turbulent 60s, I was a peace and social justice activist, as well as working with a wide number of organizations, including civil rights groups, anti-Vietnam War groups. As a medical student, I went to the Farm Workers Union and developed a slideshow and recruited staff. The United Farm Workers Union under Cesar Chavez for their farm workers clinic. We also were active in trying to stop the war in Vietnam, and we had young doctors demonstrating, along with thousands of others, to bring an end to that very unfortunate war that lasted far too long and killed far too many people. Great tragedy. When I was a young doctor, I was active in the trade union movement, and I was organizer, co-founder of a group called LA COSH, COSH, that was Committees on Occupational Safety and Health. And we were a coalition of labor, trade unionists, and health professionals working with workers to educate them about the hazards, trying to avoid industrial accidents and making the American workplace safer. And I did that. I also worked as an industrial toxicologist for the Permanente medical group. I graduated from Tufts in 1976, and I was in internal medicine for number of years. I also did emergency room work for about 10 years, had experiences in the office, both taking care of routine medical issues. I was also gerontology, used to visit the nursing homes. I did a small stint for 2 years, part-time in what was called a chemical dependency recovery program. I assisted drug addict and alcoholics to rehabilitate. And I also worked in workers' comp and the hospital-based, what's called hospitalist medicine. So I had a very broad internal medicine exposure for a career that lasted almost 40 years. I retired, took early retirement about 7 years ago, and I wanted to dedicate myself more to the phenomena. My interest in the phenomena goes back to 1990, when for no particular reason, I went to the local public library and I said, what do you got on, I needed a hobby. So I said, okay, what do you got on UFOs? They showed me a book called The Amazing Gulf Breeze Sightings by Walters and Ed and Francis. And so it was a book about sightings that occurred on the Gulf Coast in the late 1980s and early 90s. So I found the issue of flying saucers for some strange reason fascinating. I attended my first UFO meeting about a year and a half later after reading several dozen books, and I met a tall, bearded, blonde ER doctor who could have passed as my cousin, both over 6 feet tall, both in ER work. Dr. Greer was his name, still is. He and I both married women, Jewish, 6 years older than us. There were a lot of things about our background which very similar, but whereas I was political, he was spiritual. He had been a TM instructor. So I discovered the CE5 initiative, and for 7 years, I was one of the principal organizers of what was called back then the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind Initiative. I think the audience is probably aware of what that is. Is that correct?
Yes.
I'd imagine most are. If you want to touch on it, you can.
So basically, it's human-initiated contact. We would go to UFO hotspots, and the reason we do that is exemplified by the story of Willie Sutton, the famous bank robber in the 1930s, who periodically would break out of jail for bank robbing. He'd be interviewed by press, and why do you rob banks, Willie? And he says, that's where the money is. So why do we go to UFO hotspots? To initiate interactive experiences, because that's where the money is. If there's ongoing UFO activity, we have a greater chance. We also use powerful lights to signal our intention to interact. In the UFO literature, there's a number of cases. One of my coworkers named Preston Dennett, who I'll tell you more about in a bit, he wrote an article called, I think, Calling All UFOs. And he observed from the UFO literature that often UFOs will show up over laser light demonstrations or rock concerts where there's powerful lights. And so we decided we would use powerful lights as an indication that we were interested in contact. But we also use thought projection, mental interactions, telepathy. And we followed a program of meditation and then what we hoped were effective. And there's support for that in the UFO literature as well. In J.L. Hynek's and Philip Imbrogno's book, The Night Siege, which describes the series of events that happened along the Hudson River Valley in the 1980s, massive boomerang-shaped craft were observed by thousands of witnesses along the major highways north of New York City. And several of the sightings were associated with people thinking, oh, I'd like you to come closer if you would. And associated with those thoughts, these large craft would come in and approach them. And so it's well established that not only do mental interactions occur with non-human beings in so-called close encounters of the third and fourth kinds, but can also occur during sightings when people are having UFO sightings. So we use that as a basis for support for the thought projections that we were carrying out. And we carried out our activities in the Santa Susana Pass. I was the team leader, LA committee, it was called LAC, well, it was called CE5 Initiative, LA branch. And as soon as we started doing contact work, to our surprise, we had immediate sightings. Red orbs appeared adjacent to our site. There were one time we had a sighting of a golden globe. And I have to say that our site was a very special one. And the reason why there had been so many sightings at this site in the Santa Susana Pass, which is the northwestern corner of the Los Angeles County, it's high desert. The reason there were sightings there, we were not aware of this so much at the time, was that a very highly sensitive strategic laboratory was there, the Department of Energy site in Santa Susana. And this base not only developed Star Wars technology used to shoot down incoming missiles, but probably was also the place where technology was developed to also attempt to shoot down UFOs. And when we got there and we had a lot of sightings, initially we thought, my gosh, this is great. This CE5 work, human-initiated contact. We've got the Rosetta Stone of contact, you know. Mm-hmm. But what happened was the UFOs were already there. And the reason I know they were there is because several years after I stopped working with the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence And I was working with Dr. Greer from 1992 to 1997, 98. But in 98, I resigned because of personal, political, and professional reasons, which are too detailed to get into at this point. But there were many major differences that we had. And so I went my ways. And after I left the group, I continued to support what I call HICE, Human-Initiated Contact Events or Human-Initiated Contact Experiences. I think HICE is a better acronym rather than CE5 for reasons that I could outline at a later point. In any case, in 2006, I'm in the emergency room working. It's a slow day. An African-American gentleman comes in for admission. I asked him what his occupation is. He says, I was working for the Department of Energy. And I said, where? And he said, the Santa Susana Pass, high desert, right at the Department of Energy site. So I said, do you ever have a UFO sighting? And he looked a little taken aback at first. And since he was retired, and I explained that I had done UFO research at the site, he opened up to me and he said that around 1990, his job was as a maintenance engineer to maintain the physical plant of that enormous base, which had many levels underground. It was so important that base was actually appeared on Soviet nuclear war planning maps that I happened to get a hold of after the end of the Cold War. The Santa Susana Department of Energy site, written in Cyrillic on a map, was targeted for nuclear combat because this base had a nuclear reactor that happened to have a meltdown in the 1950s. They developed the space shuttle engines, which were tested at that base in the 1960s and 70s. So we were operating near a strategic base, and that was the reason why we had our sightings. And the reason I know this is true is because the Department of Energy engineer who I was interviewing that day several years later said one day the alarm went off, and his job as a maintenance engineer was to maintain the physical plant, plumbing, electrical. And in order to supply the base with water, enormous water towers were on top of the base, and large pipes would carry the water down into the various labs. Some of them were underground. Periodically, there'd be landslides. You know, Los Angeles is earthquake prone. So a periodic hair breaks in these large pipes. So the alarms go off one hot afternoon, and he and his coworker know what to do. They grab their machete, their weed whacker, and they start following these very large pipes down the mountainside, cutting away the brush, trying to find out where the water was being lost. They come to a clearing and they see the water shooting up like a geyser. They found it. But that wasn't the only thing they found. When they went over to inspect the pipe, they were surprised that a section of the pipe cleanly had been cut out, as if by a laser or precision tool. This was not a usual busted pipe caused by an earthquake or rocks falling on it. This was sabotage. And as he looked across the clearing, some 50 to 100 feet away, there was a silent metallic disc that was spinning about 10 feet off the ground, and immediately called security. And they said to him something that he thought was funny. He said, whatever you do, don't approach the craft, which was the last thing they wanted to do. So these guys were shaking. The craft then took off. Security showed up. The next day, the suits came from Washington and debriefed him. So I knew, in retrospect, that our initial contact of successes at that place was probably not because of our efforts, because the UFOs were already there. As Willie Sutton said, that's where the money is. That's where you go to try to initiate contact. But once we had contact, things got upfront and personal. Because in the first month of us doing our contact work, not one, not two, but three people associated with our team had sightings of UFOs, and they were all under highly congruent circumstances. Each one of these sightings, which did not happen when we were in the Santa Susana Pass, happened when we happened to be driving in our own cars alone. And curiously enough, each one of us was headed in a southern direction when the events happened. The first sighting was for me. I think it was around the 16th, of September, 1992. I have to tell you that when I first learned about the CE5 initiative, and I had only been reading about UFOs for a year and a half, and had only started doing investigations that month, I was a little bit, shall we say, wet behind the ears. I went to a prestigious meeting where there were several prominent MUFON members, and it was called the LA UFO Study Group. And they heard about our efforts, and they were taken aback. They said, no. You're not interacting with extraterrestrials. These flying saucers are unknowns. And what we do is we carry out research by investigating people who have had sightings, and then we get the information, and then we make an assessment as to whether this is a bona fide UFO or maybe a misidentification of an airplane or the Goodyear blimp or the planet Venus. I turned around and I said, wait a second. We have developed a technique that allows us to have real-time interaction with the phenomena, and we can signal back and forth, which we did have some signaling, which is a long story at the Santa Susana Pass. And what you guys are doing is retrospective. It's akin to journalism. In order to do real science, and I imagined what we were doing was real science. In retrospect, I'm not so sure. What we were doing was more akin to intelligence work or espionage work rather than true science. But in any case, I thought we were doing a scientific prospective investigation. And I said something really kind of arrogant. I should never say it. I thanked them for their service, because these were older 70s and 80s who had been in MUFON since the beginning. I said, but the next generation is going to go forward, and we're going to interact directly. So I got home from the meeting and I said to my wife, Yael, baby, there's good news and there's bad news. Bad news is I sort of was kind of insulting, and I'm never going to be invited back to the prestigious UFO study group. But the good news is I just saw a UFO. And as I was driving through the Santa Susana Pass on my way back from that meeting, a blue-green light appeared over the Los Angeles basin. It was moving very slowly, was kind of in a serpiginous trajectory. It flew right over the entrance to the Sepulveda Pass. I wasn't in the Santa Susana, it was the Sepulveda Pass, 405 freeway. And it slowly moved by. In LA, because of the light pollution, the marine layer, you can always see the silhouette of any craft that you spot in the sky, because light is coming from above as well as from below. But this had no silhouette. It wasn't a helicopter. It was moving too slowly to be a fixed-wing aircraft. It was a UFO, or as they're now called, unidentified aerial phenomena. The next sighting was even more dramatic. We had 3 physicians on our team. And if I had time, I would explain the amazing synchronicities that allowed us to have such a high-powered team in the initial days of this CE5 initiative. We had 3 physicians. We had 2 PhD psychologists. We had a screenwriter for Hollywood. And we had a 747 pilot, as well as Preston Dennett, who some of the audience may be aware of. He's a prominent author. He was a young Preston Dennett at that time. He subsequently went on to write over 25 books on UFOs. We had a high-powered team that could not have come together by chance, but I think came together because of the synchronicities that are associated with this phenomena. And this is why many people question the extraterrestrial hypothesis. They say, as I think Jacques Vallée said, this phenomena is so strange, it appears to be able to manipulate time-space. And incredible synchronicities occur that can bring people together as part of the phenomena, and facilitated bringing a really good team together for me, because I was just studying this stuff in books, and all of a sudden now I've got pilots and fellow physicians. One of them was Dave Gordon, who he was so respected by his colleagues that they allowed him as a family physician to do an informal study of hundreds of patients and medical staff about UFO sightings that they had. So we had developed, as a result of Dave Gordon's work, a network of people who were feeding us intelligence as to where sightings were occurring in the area. So in any case, one of the members of the team was Dotha Wayburn. Now she's passed away. At that time, she was the oldest member of the team. And she was a wealthy woman, had a beautiful home in the Palos Verdes Peninsula. I don't think many of you people in the audience know about Palos Verdes Peninsula, but it's sort of like Beverly Hills on the coast. Very exclusive, very wealthy. And she, as a yachtswoman, became very knowledgeable of astronomy because she'd sailed the 7 seas, and having her on the team was great. She was also a very experienced meditator. Well, towards the end of that September month, she had a sighting too. But before I talk about that, I'm going to talk about Dave Gordon. His wife, Eve Gordon, also was on our team. She was an immunologist and an internist, and she eventually became head of our department of immunology. She attended air shows with her husband because he was a private pilot, David Gordon. And so she could identify all conventional craft, but was not interested in UFOs initially at all. It was Dave, her husband, who was the contactee. Yes, he was a contactee. He had missing time as a teenager. And his interest was tremendous. Her interest was zero. However, they were in the same household. And for some strange reason, as this works out, she had a sighting when she was driving in broad daylight through the Warner Center, which is a industrial park, south, and she looked towards the Santa Monica Mountains in the San Fernando Valley, and she saw a metallic disc glittering in the sun. Broad daylight sighting of a disc. And because she was an experienced sky watcher, she used to go to the air shows, she knew astronomy. That was not the Goodyear blimp. That was the second sighting of two people either in our team or very close to being in the team. As soon as she saw the UFO, she became gung-ho, wanted to join the team, and she did. But the third sighting was the most dramatic of all. I mentioned Dotha Wayburn. She had just attended a meditation class, and it's curious that we use meditation. And so she left the meditation class and was driving to her, shall we say, her palatial estate on the Palos Verdes Peninsula. She's driving up a road, which is her driveway, to get to her home on a cliff looking out over the Pacific Ocean. And she sees a light above her house, and she says, "What's that?" There's thought to be, I never saw a light above my house. It was a white light. As she drove up the driveway, the light started to move, and it started moving down towards her. And as it approached, she saw it clearly. It was a 25-foot mother of pearl luminescent globe. Maybe it was 30 feet across, totally silent, flying. And as it came towards her, it then turned slightly and started to head out to sea. But before it started to head out to sea, she got the telepathic communication. In words, it was, "You were looking for us. Well, here we are." Wow. So this series of contact events was a tremendous boost, as you can imagine, in the level of enthusiasm and involvement of my team. And if I had time, I'd go through the adventures of our working group. We had a very high-level contactee who joined us the following year. This individual, like the CSETI director, Dr. Greer, was a UFO magnet. And one of the things I learned through my association with people like Stephen Greer and this Russian contactee, Misha, and many others, that I was basically, it's like in Hollywood, okay? It's not what you know, it's who you know. And I found that by searching for these high-level contactees who were UFO magnets, by associating with them and by doing the contact protocols with them, I could have many, many, many sightings and other interactive experiences. And it was, well, what can I say? I did not think that such things were possible a year before I developed my interest in contact. And that went on for 5 years. One of the most dramatic sequence of events, and I'm going to stop in just a few minutes talking about our working group, because I wanted to get on to the healing cases, as I know people are very interested in hearing about UAP healings. As a physician, I was in a unique position to interview people who had healings as a result of their interactions with UAP intelligences. So what happened is that in 1993, I was working with this Russian contactee, and it was the day after Christmas. You have to remember that people in Southern California, when the temperature drops below 40, they think the world is coming to an end. And no matter how much clothing they pile on, they're too cold and they're afraid that they'll get caught in a storm. But I was working with this Russian contactee who would run around high desert fieldwork sites in the autumn and winter with a T-shirt on. I mean, he was well padded, big Russian guy. So he made the outrageous claim that when he was living in Russia, actually it was Belarus, although he's ethnic Russian and Jewish, like I'm Jewish, and my grandparents came from Russia as well. He claimed that when he was in Russia, Belarus, he had a dream that he would emigrate to the United States, he would find work in a healthcare setting, and that he would do contact work with a tall, bearded Jewish doctor. He claims, and I can't verify this, but he said that in 1992, when he got a job as an EKG tech in our hospital, I was the man of his dream. Well, that and $2 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. Can't verify it. But I do know that as soon as Misha, I'll call him Misha, joined the team, the level of contact went way up. I was having trouble at that time because there were some fear issues I had. My psychic abilities were, well, average would be kind. I had no psychic ability. I needed a boost in my psychic ability to be a team leader under these conditions because thought projection was an integral part of our work. I asked for help to the intelligence behind the phenomena. I got help because as soon as Misha joined the team, I had a boost in my psychic ability. On several occasions, I had a telepathic override where in the course of doing field work, in advance of the sightings that would occur, I was mentally shown the time, the place, where in the sky, and the number of craft that would show up. And the first time Misha went out in the field with us, October 1993, I got the message, northwest, 1 craft, 2 a.m. So I told my team, hey guys, I was working ER then, and I had a lot of overnights, and I was very sleep deprived. I took the prerogative as being the team leader. I says, I'm going to lie down and take a nap. You guys continue with the light work and the meditation. You must wake me up under all circumstances. You must wake me up at 10 minutes to 2 because showtime is 2 o'clock. We're going to have a sighting in the northwest, 1 craft. They woke me up, and just as I predicted, or a better word would be, northwest, 1 red solitary glowing light appeared, was maybe 2 to 3 miles away. It was moving perhaps 100 miles an hour, maybe 200. It then shifted from moving in a southeasterly direction to eastern direction and accelerated at a tremendous speed, totally silent. Well, so by associating with people who have this, what I call prime contactees, these are people like Greer in his early days. He's not so successful now, but enough to keep the high-paying clients attending his ambassador trainings. I was able to go to England and had many sightings there because there was a Canadian contactee, and we had sightings every single night. We did field work together, and some of it was very dramatic. The local police actually came out because of one of the sightings that we had. So it's like in Hollywood. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And because of the consciousness connection, I used to make the joke with my coworkers, once you join the network, or what I call the contact underground, that's the sort of romantic term for this loose network of contact workers. We have Peruvian contact workers in this Peruvian group called Mission Rahma. I did field work with them. Once you join the contact underground, I say you'll never be lonely again because the consciousness connection stays with you. And you can have sightings, as I did, for years, even when I wasn't doing field work. Well, that's a whirlwind tour in 25 minutes or less of some of the contact work. If I had time, I would really get into that. But since we're going to, perhaps you have a question or you'd like to stop for a moment so the audience could come up for air.
Yeah, well, you know what? The timing was absolutely perfect because we do actually have to cut for a commercial break right now. But as soon as we get back, we'll get into the UAP stuff and
questions that I could pop up too. But before we hit commercial break, I want to shout out to KPNL Radio. Thank you for simulcasting tonight. We missed it at the beginning, but we love you all the same. Thank you. All right.
I had planned it at the end, but good. Give them the midway there.
I'm not telling you that. Okay. So, all right. We'll see you in 5.
Okay.
Be right back.
We are the ones in the dark. We are the first on the scene. We are the last to leave. We will counsel you. We will comfort you. We will save your life. We are the unsung. We are the underdogs.
Hi there, this is Dave Scott from Spaced Out Radio, where together, my friends, we own the night. On our website, spacedoutradio.com, we have a place called the SOR Sightlines Report. All of our investigations and people who inquire are turned over to TESSA, the Experiencers Support Association. Ryan Stacy and his crew, what I like about them, they're independent. They're not working for anybody, and they want answers. We want answers for our listeners and people who inquire as well about their experiences. It's a great tandem, and we love being teamed up with Tessa. If you haven't heard of us before, that's okay. We'd love to earn your listening ears. Join us 9:06 Pacific Time, 12:06 a.m. Eastern for 3 hours of live entertainment 7 days a week.
Hi, this is Ernie Hudson, Winston Zedmore from Ghostbusters. I want to let you know that Ryan Stacy, he's created the Experiencer Support Association, TESA. You can check them out at www.tesacan.org. Now, they investigate paranormal, UFO, and provide support to experiencers. You can check them out at, like I said, www.tesacan.org and see for yourself if they're really Ghostbusters. I can tell you this, they are a non-profit organization. So good luck, have fun, and keep on busting.
Have you ever wondered if there were others just like you? People with extraordinary abilities and unique intuitions. People who experience unusual and paranormal events. People who have more questions than answers. You are not alone. Experiencers Anonymous. Visit tessacan.org.
And we're back.
Yes, we are back with Dr. Joseph Burkes. Thank you again for that amazing, very quick and rapid fire 25 minutes. It was phenomenal, the backstory there. I wish we had more time to get more into that, but let's get right back into what you came here to talk about and really wanted to share.
So let's fast forward, another 15, 20 years. My intensive contact work under the CE5 banner was from 1992 to 1997. I had a number of negative experiences that had to do with surveillance. I would say there was no frank harassment, but there was a continuous presence of intelligence officers. From the very beginning, we were being shadowed. And in 1996, we went to out in the field in Joshua Tree National Monument. For a week before I went into the field, my phone rang every hour on the hour. My wife or I would pick it up. No one's on the phone. You know, the message is, we know who you are. We're watching you. But I took the attitude that what we're doing is legal. It's under the First Amendment of the Constitution, freedom of association, freedom of speech. And if intelligence operators wanted to be out there and looky-loos, it's a free country. So I wasn't particularly disturbed by that kind of phone call. But when we actually got to the site, we were being photographed by this guy who looked like he was a Marine drill sergeant from the local 29 Palms Marine base. This was in Joshua Tree National Monument before it became and then another group of people were coming, and they were also photographed on the road. So there was fairly intensive surveillance. What I found most disturbing was that night, we had a sighting in the west at around 9, and then a few hours later, there was a sighting in the due north over Queen Mountain. So we anticipated, simple-minded, if the eastern is 9 o'clock, the north is 12 o'clock, we figured, okay, UFOs are going to show up at 3 o'clock in the east. However, a sandstorm hit our site, and we had to dig in, because the winds were going 20, 30 miles an hour. You couldn't see anything, gusting up to 50. And the next morning, we're waking up and cleaning the dust off ourselves, but all of us had the sense there's something going to happen in the east, where we had anticipated the next sighting to occur. And then the sky exploded. Not one, not two, but 3 waves of fighter bombers. The first wave came in. They were F-14s, I believe. Yeah, F-14s, less than 500 feet off the deck in combat positioning, shot right over our heads. The sound was deafening, and that was followed by another wave, and then the third wave was higher up at about 1,000 feet. These were all way below the 2,000-foot FAA guidelines for the national park. They're not the 29 Palms Marine Base also had a naval air station there, or marine air station, and so in any case, the UFOs, we anticipated they were in the east, and those jet bombers were going right to the east. Now, I can't say that they were chasing UFOs. We did not see a UFO, although we had previous sightings on previous episodes, but I was shaken. I got the impression that there was a possibility our team was bait. The UFOs were showing up for us. It was predictable. And what happened, it was interesting. I had this sort of terrible concern about the pilots, because when they're operating at less than 500 feet, if they have to ejecting at 300 miles an hour at a low altitude is very dangerous. They would be killed. So I had the idea that if there was going to be any shooting going on, our pilots might be killed. And this wave of sorrow hit me. In the subsequent months, it was uncanny because there were a series of accidents of F-14s. They had to actually stop flying them for a while. They claimed that it was problems with their avionics. But my suspicion is that there were encounters where pilots were killed under other circumstances. In any case, that pretty much finished contact work in the States. I did contact work in England, but that's a whole nother story. So that was the end of that career. And I had a chance to work with MUFON. I was an investigator for a while. I then worked with the Peruvian contactees I mentioned previously, Rahma, very spiritual group. They've had many encounters, and their leaders had made claims to have had onboard experiences. I'm not so sure that has occurred, but they were very solid people, professional people, middle-class people, very spiritual. I believe that they believed that they had onboard experiences, although I tend to doubt a lot of that stuff. And I'll tell you why. If we had time to get into the whole concept of what I call the virtual experience model, which is a model of UFO contact that I developed as a result of my intense contact experiences back in the 90s. Basically, what the virtual experience model says is that many, perhaps most, but certainly not all so-called UFO sightings are illusions. They're either holographic projections that everyone in the field can see, or they're illusions that have been created by directly stimulating the visual apparatus of the central nervous system. And through a series of amazing contact experiences, believe it or not, the intelligence behind the phenomena, sort of like baby steps, they showed me how they can do this, which then undermined my confidence in what I was seeing. Was it really solid, structured craft, or were they holographic-like projections? And perhaps in the half an hour that occurs after the show, I can get into the sightings and other interactive experiences that brought me to a virtual experience model.
Awesome.
The second condition, virtual experience of the second kind, is a full sensory kind of like, shall we say, it was a full sensory illusion. It's more real than real. And there's support within the UFO literature that shows that some so-called abductions are being created by a psychotronic technology that the so-called aliens have. And if you read a book that's available as a PDF file by the late Dr. Carla Turner, A Masquerade of Angels, you can read about, and I think chapter 4, just one of those type of incidences where a woman is being observed by her friends, and all of a sudden a blue globe forms around her with lightning bolts inside. And she starts describing what above she thinks is a helicopter, and there is no helicopter. And then the helicopter turns into a flying saucer. And within moments, she's talking to what she imagines are two aliens sitting at the bed. And her friends who are outside of this globe that has surrounded her are very alarmed. And they're saying, "Can you get out of there? We want to get you out of there." But they were afraid to reach in to grab her. So that's, I think, one example from the literature that the so-called aliens can create a holographic type of matrix reality, would be the word, as in the movie The Matrix. And then the third condition of the virtual experience model is virtual memory. Again, there's support within the UFO literature to show that this intelligence can put into the minds of people false memories. Everyone who studied the phenomena knows about so-called screen memories. Well, the question is, why couldn't the alien abduction experience that's retrieved either by hypnosis, why could that not also be an implanted memory? And the UFO intelligence has actually staged an event for me, well, not for me, but for coworkers in the Midwest, that demonstrated virtual experience of the third kind, or virtual memory, false memories being implanted into the consciousness of one of the contact workers. So this was a very exciting time of my life. Following leaving CE5 Initiative, I have not spoken to Dr. Stephen Greer in over 20 years. I value the work we did during the early days of the initiative, but there are many things about his persona, his approach to the phenomena, the disrespect he deems out to experiencers with his claims that any negative experience is either confused people who are frightened for no good reason, or they're victims of MILAB. I found that to be disturbing. And I found another very good group, though, to be involved with, and that's called Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Experiences. And the acronym is FREE, F-R-E-E, and that group was founded back in 2013 by Ray Hernandez, who's a contact experiencer and also an IRS lawyer, Rudy Shields, who's a professor emeritus of astrophysics at Harvard, Mary Rodwell, who's a contact activist, and she works with experiencers in Australia, and Edgar Mitchell, the famous Dr. Edgar Mitchell, one of the moon-walking astronauts. And that organization has dedicated itself to deal with what is called the contact modalities. And there is the hypothesis that UFOs, flying saucers, as you call them, ghosts, certain kinds of psychedelic experiences, out-of-body experiences, and near-death experiences are all mediated by one central powerful force, and that's the force of consciousness. And so this group devised what was called the Free Experiencer Survey, F-R-E-E, and what that was a comprehensive multinational academic research study that involved close to 600 questions that were sent out to experiencers, and a total of 4,200 self-described contact experiencers from over 100 countries participated in this investigative 5-year project. And this was a very important milestone study that has not gotten much tread from the UFO research community, partly because what we found were things that go against the traditional wisdom of the UFO subculture. What we found was that although about 10 to 12%, 15%, depending on how you ask the question, would want their experiences to stop because they were bad and very unpleasant, the overwhelming majority of people had either positive experiences or were neutral.
Mm-hmm.
We also found that the contact experiencers described themselves being transformed in the process of contact. Well, that's something I know about personally, because when I started doing the contact work, even before I had missing time, all of a sudden I'm meditating once or twice a day. I discovered the power of prayer. I had been a strict materialist and believed in science as the supreme arbiter of truth. And now I'm meditating, praying, doing thought projection. And suddenly I completely lost my taste for meat. I took a course in TM. Now, before I was a meat and potatoes man, I didn't care what animal we killed, even baby calves. I'll eat the veal. But as soon as I started doing the contact work, I could not swallow meat. I choked. I did not want to. I didn't want to even look at it. So that was my story. I also started to pray, and was curious enough that I prayed for. This is somewhat of an extravagant tale to tell, but I was this materialist who now is praying, vectoring in spacecraft. And my poor wife is worried that I've lost it and that I'm going to go on a mountaintop and with a yogi somewhere and abandon her and the six-digit income that I was earning as an emergency room doctor. And she, so she was very upset. She didn't tell anybody that I was praying. I chose to pray for a woman who my wife was very fond of, her friend Stephanie, who was going through marital problems. And so I started praying for the first time as an adult for Stephanie. And I was training people to meditate. And so I'd meditate for 20 minutes. Then I would go into prayer, do the right thing, do what is natural. Thy will be done for Stephanie. And I did this with a passion. After about a week, Stephanie reports to my wife that she's feeling so much more peaceful. She feels so much better because it's as if, and these were her exact words, as if someone were quietly praying for me. Wow. So that was a hit in terms of parapsychology. I don't know whether it was remote influencing or whether angels answered the prayer, but I do know that Stephanie made that statement. And I know my wife never told anyone that I was doing those spiritual-based practices. So what we see from the free experiencer study is that these contact can be transformative in a positive way, and that our contact was primarily paranormal rather than physical experiences. Not all the people who were having telepathic communication were also having, a lot of people didn't have sightings, but still had contact with beings. And the most important point is that contact involves the manipulation of space-time. These experiences very well might be interdimensional rather than extraterrestrial. So as part of that free experiencer study, we asked questions concerning any positive or negative experiences. We asked over 40 questions to address this issue. We asked many questions to cross-reference the responses to make sure that people were giving consistent results. And the most important question I mentioned, how would you describe your experiences? Positive, 66%, neutral, 29%, negative, 5% in that particular question. When it came to would you want your experiences to stop, 84% said no, 15% said yes, they would. And in terms of my involvement with the phenomena, I'll skip ahead a little bit. My involvement was question 137. Do you believe that any of these ETs have performed a medical healing on either you or another member of your family? Of the 1,534 plus respondents, 767, exactly 50% said yes. They had had healing by themselves or someone in their family. We then asked the question a little differently. We asked, have you had a sudden or rapid healing that you believe was a result of ET intervention? Now, this was just the person themselves. The answer out of 1,379 respondents was 35% said yes, they personally had experienced a healing. So I know we're running out of time, and I want to thank you all for giving me an opportunity to address these issues. Perhaps in a later program, I can get into some of the very specific healing cases because they are quite instructive as to the nature of the consciousness connection with the phenomena. I urge everyone to get a hold of the book Beyond UFOs, which was a summary of the Free Experiencer survey. It's a heavy book. It's over 800 pages. So if you're going to get it and you have a limited living space, and you can get it as an ebook for, I think, maybe $10, $12, something like that. Chapter 6 is the chapter that Preston Dennett and I wrote about. We couldn't interview the hundreds of people who made claims to having healing, so we took 10 of the best cases, and we did in-depth interviews, and we had extensive discussions as to what we believe went on with them. But the cases were truly remarkable. We had an emergency room doctor who was passed out from hemorrhagic shock as a result of